Greetings, ghosts and goblins, and welcome to another episode of
80 Bird Pod Smash!
Where Gaming Goes for a little fear while we grab a beer.
Yes.
It was a terrible ting on me.
Tink on me, tink on me.
We are your hosts.
Penguin and Termite, I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas, terrifying and frightening ideas with video games.
That's right, and we are continuing our yearly tradition of doing one of our Monster Smash episodes, where we pick a classic horror monster, or any monster really, but like, you know, the kind of well-known monsters that you think of around this time of year, and we talk about all the video games that feature them and their influence on video games, and we just, like we always do in this podcast, we smash those two ideas together. And this year, you probably have figured out, we've chosen werewolves. Oh. And I have such a hard time saying that word without thinking about that 30 Rock skit and singing in my head, Werewolf Bar Mitzvah, spooky, scary, every time. And every time I'm going to do it.
So, I've never seen 30 Rock, so I have no clue what you're talking about.
Oh my gosh, it's one of the greatest. I'll just link you after this episode, just so that you can join me in my madness here. I'm going to link you the song because it was from an episode and it's just so funny. And it's actually written by Donald Glover. So Donald Glover actually writes and performs. They only had a clip of it in the show because it was just a small little thing, but they actually wrote a whole song. And so it's performed by Donald Glover's singing it alongside Tracy Morgan, or Tracy Morgan. Yeah, that's the actual actor's name. Right. Yeah. So anyways, great show, but whatever. We're not talking about 30 Rock. We're talking about werewolves. So yeah, we'll get into all about, if you don't know what a werewolf is for some reason, maybe it's not part of your culture and you're listening to this from some other part of the world, then we'll explain it. But I think the vast majority of you know something about werewolves, so we'll be talking about the werewolves in video games. Yeah. And I've been excited. This is the episode I wanted to do 2-3 years ago when we started this whole series, but I figured I'd give us the chance to start with something a little bit more popular like vampires, but right. I'm so glad we're finally doing werewolves, so let's do it. All right, we will be talking a lot about werewolves tonight, but we are where gaming goes to grab a beer and fear. So what frightening beer are you drinking tonight?
It is seasonally appropriate, but it's kind of boring because I had it last week and I'm still drinking Sam Adams Oktoberfest.
That's fine. It's a great beer, and you have 28 of them or something like that.
Yeah. But my wife and I drink them both, and we drink more than them through the week, so it'll go through. It's not like I'm chipping away at it once a week.
Nice, yeah.
So a 6-pack's not gonna last me 6 weeks. We'll go through 6 of them, 7, maybe 10 of them in a week. So this will probably be gone by next week.
Nice. I decided that since we're talking about werewolves and werewolf lore, much of our understanding of werewolf lore comes from Europe. I've got a nice imported beer that I grabbed in a 6 for $9.99 kind of pick your own, make your own 6-pack thing at Food Lion.
Yeah. And
so this is from Munich, and it is called Franziskaner Weisbeer. Weisbeer, I suppose it would be pronounced if it's German. And it's, in accordance with the Bavarian purity law. So I don't know what that is, but it's worth looking up. So yeah, it's a Weisbeer imported over from Germany. Munich's Germany, right? Or is that, I feel really bad for if we have any European listeners.
Munich is a city in Germany, yes.
Okay, thank gosh.
I had to look it up, though. You're not the only one.
Yeah, good. Okay, good.
I had to look it up, but yes, Munich is a city in Germany.
Well, it's like Bavarian purity law, so I was like, wait, is that German? But yes, but Munich sounded like when I think of Munich, the first country I think of is Germany. But I was like, maybe it is I don't know, Switzerland or something. So the Bavarian
purity law was adopted in all of Germany in 1906, but it started initially applied to the Duchy of Bavaria only. So, but now it's
Duchy
across.
Duchy of Bavaria.
Really? For real?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it.
Stuff. Okay. But the law is nothing other than barley, hops, and water is to be used to produce the beer.
Nice. Cool.
No other, you're not going to get a fruited experience or sour. It's barley, hops, and water. And that is it.
For what I'm assuming is a fairly large, exporter. So I'm assuming a fairly large, I'm assuming this is a fairly this would be I don't know. I don't want to say necessarily Bud Light over there, but I'm assuming this is a fairly prestigious, or not, prestige is not the word I'm looking for, prolific, that's what I'm thinking of, the fairly prolific exporter of beer. So if it's showing up in Virginia and it's from Munich, right? Like I'm assuming this is a pretty, I would be considered a macro brewery, maybe. It certainly tastes like a craft beer. Like, oh my gosh, this is like a toned down version of Golden Monkey right now. It's got that same flavor profile of that kind of sweet, but like also savory almost flavor there. I like it a lot. I really like this. I'm gonna get this more when I have a chance, and it's very like, I don't know. I could see myself drinking this in the summer, but I think it also has got a flavor profile fitting of fall as well.
It does.
A bit of vanilla, a little bit of that. I have to get that barley. It's good. I love it.
And they didn't know the importance of yeast back then, so I imagine when this law was like enacted, that most of the beers that they were drinking would be like equivalent to what we would know as a farmhouse ale, where it's like naturally yeasted, meaning you wouldn't be able to reproduce the same beer because every single time you brew it, you'd have a different yeast makeup.
Right.
Or now in like today's age, we actually genetically preserve the yeast down to its DNA and like make sure we reuse it so we can have the consistency across all the batches. But I digress.
Yeasty boys. All right. Well, that is what we're drinking. So we usually fill this time up with talking about stuff, and it sounded like you had something you wanted to share. So
yes. So as we talked about in our neurodiversity episode, you had been diagnosed as a neurodiverse individual, and you started seeking medication, and you've taken it, and you have now...
I'm not too crazy, guys. I'm just ADHD.
But there's a word that's not ADHD that I can't remember. ADHN?
I don't think there's an official thing. I think most of us just call ourselves ADHD. As an ADHD person, I feel like I can speak for the rest of the community and just say, call me ADHD.
Well, okay. But you have been super, super productive, and we switched over to a new way of doing things from Evernote to using Google Drive and Slack, which I think is awesome and is going very well so far after the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Slack's no, I like it. I think it's working for something that is, kind of we adjusted to fairly last minute. I think it's been a pretty seamless transition. And I really like Google Drive. I think Google Drive has been working great for us.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, no. So I finally, this week, or I guess it was last week, I finally kind of landed on a Adderall dosage that is working for me. So I am on 40 milligrams of extended release. And the first day I was on it, it was just like, yes, finally. This is the feeling I've been looking for, where I'm just like very like productive, lots of energy. Like good energy, like good focused energy. The only difference is, or the only problem is, it gives you the ability to focus, but it doesn't quite direct that focus, if that makes sense. So I have to talk to my psychiatrist about some strategy. Now that I've kind of got the feeling that I'm looking for, I need to start thinking about some strategies as how to best like channel that focus into the things I actually want to do. Because that day I was writing up show notes, like you saw. We have several episodes of show notes already prepared in advance because I just went in there. I was like, da, 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 da. And I was talking to a work colleague about Bloodborne and trying to get him into it. And I spent like 30 minutes doing that. And
poor soul.
And I was, well, it started talking about Smash because he's a big Smash fan, and we started talking about Sora because that was the day that I think it was like day or the day after Sora was announced. Anyways, and then like I kept doing all of these fairly interesting and productive things. The only thing I wasn't doing was the thing I needed to do in that morning, and that was work on editing the podcast while work was slow. So I like missed my window, and then work picked up, and I had to focus on that. But I thought later, I was like, man, I really should have figured out a way to I probably could have gotten that episode mostly done that day because I was so focused. So, but I've been on it for a few days and I'm feeling really good. So, started exercising too on top of that, a little bit in the mornings, like just 20 minutes in the mornings. And
what do you do?
I'll just move my body, right? So, I mean, I'll do things like I'll jog a bit on the treadmill. I hate running. So that's mostly just to get my heart rate up and get started, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll run and walk fast on the treadmill for a little bit. And then we have some we have a little bit of some small weights. So I've been using those in exercises you wouldn't normally necessarily use weights for. So instead of like doing arm curls where I would need heavier weights to get the most out of it, I've been doing things like, like punches with the lighter weights. So that you add some weight with the punch.
Nice.
And then things like, and then we have resistance bands. So those I've been doing the traditional exercises on because those, provide a more of a force that matches my level of strength for those exercises. So yeah, just moving my body, getting it in motion, and get my heart. Basically it's to help my blood pressure because Adderall does raise my blood pressure. So I'm exercising as a way to try to get that down.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's been good though. It's been very it's finally at that point because I finally got a hold of the Adderall like 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
And I've been it was a journey just to get the Adderall.
That's
and
what I mean.
When I finally had it, even then, like, we had to experiment with dosages and, immediate release or extended release, which was working for me. Immediate release was not working for me, so we tried extended, and that was better, but and then there were some days that it was affecting my sleep, because it wasn't that I took too much, but I just took it it was just poorly timed the way she was having me take it. Mm-hmm. So there were a couple of nights where I was, like, just staying up till 1, and I wasn't like wired. I just was like, I wanted to keep doing what I was doing. It's just like, I didn't want to go to bed. I wasn't like, it kept me up, like insomnia. Like, I'm lying there trying to fall asleep. Like, when I went to sleep, I could go to sleep, but it was just the getting to sleep part. So anyways, it's been a journey, and I think I'm finally at a good place with it. And so I highly recommend anybody who feels like their brain works differently, go check it out. Go talk to someone. There's no, we like to be really mental health positive on this show, and there's, like, again, there should be no shame and hangups in just going and talking to someone and figuring out if there is something different. And some things can be fixed with therapy or strategies or whatever, and some things need medication, and there's nothing wrong with either approach. So nope. Go forth and be fruitful.
Medical professionals are awesome. But all that was to say and encourage you that you've been doing great and wonderfully, and you've been a super big help, and you've jumped right into the new system with Slack and Google Drive, and you've just ran with it. And now we have a schedule ahead of us with all the different topics mapped out, which we talked about. It wasn't just like you had bulldozed all of my topic choices. We discussed topic choices, but you still laid the schedule out as far as what we're talking about, and you have show notes ready all the way out through Thanksgiving, which is awesome, because now I'm starting to put thoughts to it, which is fantastic.
It allows us to prepare ahead of time, and that way we're coming in, we're not just like, oh, we literally just started thinking about this 40 minutes ago, which has totally happened in some of our episodes before.
Yes, it has. Hopefully y'all audience can't tell that, but it does.
It totally does, yeah.
So, yes, you're doing great.
Good. Thank you.
Good job, Penguin.
I need to compensate in some way for the way in which my daughter has been interfering with our recording schedules.
Right. It's fine.
All right, cool. Well, kudos and thankfulness towards partners working on a project is one of our favorite things. That was very inelegantly handled. Whatever. It's one of our favorite things.
Like a werewolf. You've segued perfectly.
Thank you. Just sing the song.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Favorite things.
This is a segment of our show where we share with you just something in our lives that we've discovered or rediscovered or experienced that we want to share with you as something that inspired us, encouraged us, intrigued us, or in general just made our lives better, in hopes that you go out and find your next favorite thing. What you got for me?
My favorite thing involves the saga of the original launch model of the PlayStation 3, which I have brought up and talked through on the show in the past. But some new stuff has happened, and this is my favorite thing. It is now sitting once again on my desk in full working order, which is my favorite thing. But I will go into a little bit of detail. I saw Fredericksburg Console Mods. You can find the guy on Facebook. He's there. He's got a Facebook page. He does console modifications and repairs. He has fixed my Virtual Boy. I've talked extensively about him on the show, so I won't go into those details, but he started posting some new tools and methods that he had gotten specifically to deal with PlayStation 3 launch models that are yellow light of deathing, like mine was. And that involves getting codes, much like a check engine light spits out codes to the mechanic. The PlayStations, when they go through these yellow lights of death, spit out codes to people who know how to get them. And he now has this suite of tools with which to get the codes from to pinpoint exactly what's going on when it yellow lights of death. So he used it, found out that the RSX, which is the GPU, was failing, and he investigated it by now using a new tool to help him delid. The chips come with, from the factory, a mounted cooler on them. So when you take apart a motherboard, you see a big giant gray square. That's not necessarily the chip. You have to take the gray square off to get to the actual chip, which is small black rectangle. And we discovered that there was no thermal paste touching that chip to the lid. So that was a problem. It was causing it to overheat. So he discovered that by delidding it. First off, the code told him it was the RSX chip, went to the RSX chip, took the lid off, discovered the thermal paste wasn't good, completely cleaned it all up and replaced it with new thermal paste, doing it correctly, and voila. You have to do a little bit of a reflow, kind of a reseating of all the soldering joints to make it all work. And now I have a live, breathing, and kicking launch model PlayStation 3, and that is my favorite thing.
Huzzah!
And it's encouraging because, like, he had done all this before. He did a bunch of work. He replaced the capacitors and soldered new ones in, and he reflowed the whole thing and brought it back to life, but it only lasted like a month. And it's one thing if, like, you don't know what's wrong with it and you just reflow it again, because then you don't really know what's going on, and who knows how long it would last before he did it again. But he actually found something, which makes it very encouraging to, like, he did something to fix it long term, I hope. So I've been running it through some stress tests. Grand Theft Auto 5 is actually a really good stress test. You can swim out in the ocean and turn the camera to the right. So I strapped some cable ties to a DualShock and just had the camera rotating in the ocean, which has like a whole bunch of things, calculating the physics of the water and then streaming in all the textures and all the models and simulations of the weather and everything around it to really like bear down on that processor. And I did it for over an hour last night, and it seemed to be fine. So I'm now preparing for another stress test that will last 10 hours using Gran Turismo 6's demo mode. So there you go. That's my favorite thing.
Congrats. My favorite thing is a little work adventure I had on Friday. Nobody wants to do anything on Friday afternoon, right? Like that's like
meetings at 4:00 on a Friday are horrible.
Right. The person who sends you a meeting invite or calls you at 4:00 or 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, like
leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly. You get daggers, right? So I was the same thing. I was like, I just want to relax. I've like front loaded my work and gotten most of it done, and I was ready to go. But basically, long story short, I was reached out to by my boss because he said, I need you to look into some packages that didn't arrive at the data center, but FedEx said they arrived on October 1st. So here's the information I had. I had that they had that FedEx had, sent a reception notice, I guess, at October 1st. I had been there since October 1st and there were no packages. And I even sent them a message and said, hey, could you guys just double check and make sure that there are no packages? And they got back and they're like, there are no packages. And I said, ugh. And someone named signed for them. So I give all this information and I'm like, okay, I probably shouldn't have said the name. I just doxed the guy. My bad. So I knew the guy I knew the name of the person who signed for it. I knew the name, or I knew the date at which they were supposed to arrive. And eventually I was able to find out that they had been sent to the wrong address. Basically, the person who ordered them was not on our team, and she ordered them from like a vendor, I guess, that had our information on file, and the address they had on file was wrong. It was an old address. And so our data center was like, yeah, we're no longer associated with that address, even though it was right next door. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So long story short, I had to go through this whole investigative process, including calling like the property owner, like the people who, like the organization that owned all the properties. I had to call them. They were actually super helpful. The lady there was like, got me in touch with the property manager, and that was ultimately what led to it. But I was just like at first, before she was able to get a hold of the property manager, she was like giving me tenants that were like in that building. So I was starting to like look up tenants. Like the best was one of the tenants that she sent me to like reach out to was a erectile dysfunction and other like masculine like medication, right? Like medication for that. They make or treatments or whatever. So I'm like, oh boy, my wife's gonna have some questions about my search history. So I was, again, at first, it was Friday afternoon, and that was also part of the problem, right? No one wanted to answer my calls on Friday afternoon.
Right.
And especially, this person we don't know who's looking for packages that we have no idea about. So anyways, we ended up finding them. It was awesome. I told my boss that I was going to demand that they purchase me with my company logo on it, a like detective hat with the logo on it. Cause I was like, I'm a tech person. I fix the technology. I don't do logistics, right? If the logistics have failed, then I don't know what to do. But I figured it out. I did it, and it took all my whole Friday afternoon, and it was pretty funny. So I don't know what part of that necessarily is my favorite thing. Maybe the adventure itself. Definitely this company. I'll shout them out. Whatever. It's called the Baker Companies, and they're the property owners, and they have a bunch of properties all across the country. Actually, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking to buy residential or like a business location, then you should check them out because they do good work, and they are run by people who are kind and who care about, you know what I mean? Like I was not affiliated. I mean, I guess I was a customer for one of their tenants. So like maybe indirectly, but I was not one of their people that directly gives them money. So like, they had no motivation to help me, and definitely not as much motivation to be polite about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're run by good people. So yeah, if you're looking to buy something, check them out. And
what about FedEx though?
FedEx they did their job, right? The only complaint I have about how this was handled was I would have preferred whoever signed for it should have just returned to sender. This is not correct, return to sender. And then the whole process would have been a lot smoother, right? Because FedEx would have notified us, and we would have been able to say, oh yeah, you got the wrong address, deliver it here instead, and we wouldn't have had to bother. But I think that like the person who signed for it was actually not the tenant themselves, but like a contractor for the tenant. So they didn't know. They were like remodeling the place anyway. So like maybe we're getting new, it was like network equipment. So they're like, maybe we're getting new network equipment. So I was like, all right. I was like, I don't blame them. I don't, because they didn't know. So, and FedEx did their job perfectly. We screwed up, I guess. We screwed up by not updating our vendor with the right info. But I kind of had wished the vendor also had like confirmed with us, is this the right info, right? So yeah. I don't know. I told the HR person who ordered this stuff, I told her, because she was pretty distraught about it. And I was like, look, you didn't know. Like, even if they had confirmed the address with you, it's the same address we've been using for years. So you would have, of course, thought that's right. So, I had to like talk her down a little bit. I was like, you're fine. It's fine. Like, I don't blame you for this. It was actually kind of fun. So, yep, that was my favorite thing. So,
all right,
cool. Well, that leads us to our final segment, which is DLC. It stands for downloadable content, and it is a little fun segment of our show where we have a more fun, lighthearted, facetious discussion, one that you wouldn't necessarily normally have about video games. And it's a little prompt and a fun little gimmicky conversation. And so tonight is related to our main topic of werewolves. And all I need from you for this discussion that we have not prepared ahead of time is entirely improvised. All I need from you is like a video game creature. So like it could be an enemy, it could be a like a companion, but some kind of recognizable video game creature that obviously cannot be a wolf or
okay.
And be more creative outside the box than just like a cat. So some kind of recognizable video game creature. I've got one, so I can start, and we can start the discussion and let you percolate an idea if you want.
I have one as well.
Okay, then I'll let you start.
Okay. An Octorok from The Legend of Zelda.
All right, well, as you may have already predicted, you have been bitten by an Octorok and now are aware Octorok. Nice. You have been infected with the Octorok version of lycanthropy and are doomed to wander the earth with some kind of trigger that causes you to turn into a raging Octorok human hybrid. So what does that look like? What features of yours get changed into Octorokish looking features? What features are more or less the same, the human part of you? What is the trigger that causes you to turn into an Octorok? Because for werewolves, it's the full moon, but for a were-Octorok, it may not be the full moon. And of course, then how are you slain by the intrepid hunters who have to put you out of your misery? What is your weakness? What is the Octorok? What is the were-Octorok's weakness? So,
well, if you've played Majora's Mask at all, you know how Link looks when he's turned into a Deku shrub when he puts on that mask for the first time.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's very similar in that gut-wrenching scream that happens, and then you end up looking like an Octorok, which is similar but not exactly the same as the Deku shrub. The Deku shrub is like the land-based version of an Octorok, so the Octorok is the marine version, the one in the water.
Yep.
And so same thing, you have a big round nostril mouth thing, and you have big glowing eyes, and
big head, your head expands. I imagine that you still have legs, but your arms have become the tentacles, and obviously you're covered in scales, or I guess you're not covered in scales, more like a squishy. Your skin becomes a little squishy and flexible.
So the trigger for becoming an Octorok is being in the water. So if you've seen the Pixar movie Luca, where the fish merman people, when they leave water, they become humans. That's exactly what this is. You go into the water and you become an Octorok, a were-Octorok. and it's extraordinarily painful and excruciating. So it's not quiet like it is in Luca, where you can just kind of hide. This is like you jump in the water or you get soaking wet, and you will experience a violent transition that will scare anyone around you and become a very big deal.
I also think in addition to the water, you have to avoid any kind of like falling rocks or projectiles of any kind, because they like chuck rocks or they like shoot rocks out of their mouth at you. Yeah. And so I feel like the creature inside of you, its instinct is to fire back, right? So if someone were to throw a rock at you, or even just a rock falls nearby you, it triggers the Octorok transformation. You start spitting rocks. Innocent bystanders.
And the weakness is actually being hit by said rocks, like you just mentioned. So
I think the weakness is ice arrows. Just like a real Octorok, or ice, some kind of frozen projectiles. You could get like cryo bullets or whatever, but those would freeze you and cause the beast within to die.
But in Zelda lore, all you have to do is use your shield to deflect the rocks back to them and die.
Yeah. Definitely.
So that's what ice arrows are a thing. Absolutely.
So ice and rocks. So getting hit by a rock in any way. So that's the way, if you find an Octorok out, or Octorok out in the wild,
you
hit him with a rock
at it.
And just hope you have good aim, because if you hit them before they transform, then you're going to be okay. Otherwise, basically something out of Bloodborne is going to come charging at you. It's terrifying. Like, the mental image is scary. Awesome. So mine real quick, we'll knock out before we jump into this, is Goomba. Goomba from Mario.
Oh, gosh.
So you're aware, you get bit by a Goomba, you're aware Goomba. Same things. What turns you into a were Goomba?
You got to answer this. This is your thing, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
So what would turn you into a Goomba?
I'm thinking proximity to turtles.
Oh,
like Koopas, right? Like Goombas are servants of Koopas. So you turn into a were Goomba
or you just go through the de-evolution machine, like in the 1995 Super Mario Brothers movie, and your head shrinks and you become a huge monster.
Yeah.
Tiny head.
And then the features, I imagine that like your head becomes in the shape of a Goomba, right? But everything else is the same. You just have a Goomba head. Your shoes change though. If you were wearing shoes, your shoes do become those little like clogs, right? Or tap dance shoes those rounded feet.
The Mario shoes. They're like plumber boots.
Yep. And then
on a Goomba.
And then the weakness obviously is anything falling on your head or landing on your head.
That's it. You can be squished very easily.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, great. That's DLC. We want to hear your were creatures from various games. They don't have to be Nintendo games, but Nintendo creatures are really fun, I think, to Goomba or to werify, lycanthropy, whatever, anthropomorphize. A word,
words.
And a word thing. So we want to hear your versions though. So, what are your creatures? Do you have were death claws like from Fallout, or what are they called? Varkids from Borderlands. Everything's game. We want to hear them all and hear your ideas, and the same criteria. We want to hear your breakdown of it as well. So Termite will share with you where you can find us to engage with us if you have thoughts that you want to share about DLC.
You can find the scariest location on the internet at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com. I joke, it's not actually scary, but it does have lots of cool information about where you can find us.
Scary good information is what it has.
Scary good information indeed. You can find links to all of our social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit. We have a Discord server as well. You can jump in and interact with us through the link in all of our show notes, and we also have links to all of our podcast platforms of your choice, choosing iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, as well as the third-party RSS link that you can throw in the RSS feed to any app you would like. Again, if you want us somewhere that we're not, let me know, and we will put us there for you, and you can do that all through 80bitpodsmash.com.
Sweet. All right. Finally, we get to talk about werewolves on the stinking podcast. So let's do it.
I'm glad we got through all the other stuff.
Yeah, stinking vampires and ghosts. Like, All right. So let's talk about werewolves. Werewolves are fun. They are probably my single favorite monster. I am totally a werewolf guy over a vampire guy. Like, vampires can go to HE double hockey sticks as far as I'm concerned. Werewolves are where it's at. I am totally team Jacob, I guess. If it makes me team Jacob for Twilight, then whatever. But werewolves are the bomb. I just think that thematically they're more interesting than vampires, and I just think that they're overall cooler. And they kind of have like the Hulk thing going for them, right? The whole like beast within, uncontrollable rage monster. Like werewolves did it first, and Hulk is just a green werewolf as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
So a green werewolf without claws. So anyways, lots of good information on werewolves out there. And so let's jump into it. So again, our first question, of course, is what is a werewolf? And whenever we do these monster smashes, we like to kind of in answering the question of what are werewolves, we like to talk about the kind of the history or origin. Where did this monster come from? What made humans conceptualize this creature that obviously doesn't exist in reality? We'll also talk about some of the pop culture history. What are some of the greatest werewolf stories of all time outside of video games? And then we'll talk about some of the folklore and descriptions and the things that have kind of become popularized in both pop culture and general folklore surrounding werewolves that have kind of all these things contribute and influence the video games you get with werewolves. So basically, we'll start with history. Where did werewolves come from? What's the origin of this legend and myth and monster? They've been around forever. like pretty much all human civilizations have stories of men transforming into beasts. It's not always wolves, but it could be tigers or panthers in some of the more jungle, whatever the most terrifying predator of a given area is. So for Europeans, it is wolves. And, most commonly encountered, I think. And then, but, there's other predators in China and South America, but, but there's always stories in those cultures of people turning into these things. And so, a lot of people think it may even go back as far as caveman times. We talked about this kind of idea with ghosts as well, where, in the ghost episode last year, we talked about how, like, when it would be cold outside, people would see the breath, the vapor coming out of the mouth. And when that vapor was gone, they thought, oh, that must have been their spirit. And now their spirit is gone, because if the vapor was gone, it means they died. They weren't breathing anymore.
Yep.
So they thought that maybe that vapor, so that kind of informed the early concept of the spirit or the ghost. Similarly, there is this thought that, people would go hunting, and they would, one of their hunting partners would go around a corner, maybe run into a pack of wolves, and then a wolf comes out on the other side. And so they think, oh, he must have turned into that wolf. Again, it's you may think it's very primitive thinking. You may think, oh, they must have been stupid. But like, if you're in that context and in that circumstance and something crazy happens, then it's, it's natural for humans, especially ones uneducated, which all humans would have been uneducated at that time, to come up with some kind of rationale for what's happening. So that kind of thing is kind of where some of the deeper origins. But the real, again, the kind of biggest thing that really influenced werewolf mythology in our culture and in most cultures is very common thing for early or for pre-modern humans to experience. But there's a disease out there that you get by being bit by animals that causes you to kind of, as it works its way to your brain, it causes you to go into a frenzy, a fury, and kind of lose faculty. And if you bite other people, you spread that same illness.
Sound like rabies?
That's exactly what it is. So yes, rabies is kind of what influenced a lot of that. So because they didn't know what rabies was. They didn't know what microorganisms or germs were. So as far as they were concerned, he got bit by a wolf and he started acting like a wolf. And lost all control. So that's kind of where in many ways the origin of the werewolf is rabies. So there's a lot more. You can totally check out the Werewolf Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's very in depth.
Yeah, there's a lot of like different things and lots of cool different stories around werewolves just in history. So it's a really fun thing. I've done my research in the past too. So gone down that rabbit hole. Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about, actually we'll do pop culture last. I don't know why I have it in this order. I think I need to reverse that order. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of the descriptions, folklore. What are, so there's the origin, of course, but it's gone beyond just rabies, right? So what's kind of the folklore and features and kind of descriptions of this thing surrounding this? So, the word you'll often see associated with werewolves is lycanthropy. Lycan is I might be wrong about this. Lycan, I believe, comes from a character in Roman mythology named Lycaon, who was cursed by Zeus to be the form of a wolf. Greek, dang it. Cursed by Zeus to become a wolf, and then anthropy is anthro is human. So wolf person, human turned into a wolf. And lycanthropy is basically the kind of catch-all term for werewolves. There is actually a condition, an actual existing condition out there that has been named after the fictional lycanthropy. So if you ever encounter medical lycanthropy, it's any human who has an overabundance of body hair. So I'm sure you've seen them on like Ripley's Believe It or Not or whatever. Yeah. So
Sasquatch. He's a lichen.
Yeah, exactly. So that is an actual condition, and anybody who has it is perfectly healthy otherwise, just has a ton of body hair, and unfortunately gets treated like a freak for their whole lives. So they totally deserve your sympathy for that, and they also totally deserve you to just treat them like a normal person. So anyways, so total side note. Anyways, the general idea is, person turns into wolf, right? Or a wolf-man hybrid. And there's all kinds of different names for the different ones, right? There's the loup-garou, which is the one, a French term to differentiate from a werewolf, like the werewolf being like turns into a wolf. But the wolf-man hybrid thing where it's got like the legs of a man and the arms of a man, but claws and face of a wolf. That can be called a loup-garou. But again, most people just think about it as werewolves. The actual word Werwolf comes from German, wer being the word for man and wolf being the word for wolf. And so, yes, man-wolf is basically what werewolf means. So sometimes it can be caused by a curse, or it can be its own creature, like it's, you're born a werewolf or whatever. Sometimes it's you've been turned into a werewolf by a witch, or you were turned into a werewolf by the devil because you are also a witch and made a compact with the devil. There's all that too. There's
Side note, there is a person called Pliny the Elder who perpetuated this idea that witches were involved in a spell, and someone would put their clothes into an oak tree. Sorry, it was not a spell, actually. It's the chosen man was escorted to a marsh area where he was hung his clothes into an oak tree, swam across the marsh to transform into a wolf, joining a pack for 9 years. And the reason why I even want to care about Pliny the Elder specifically is because there's a beer named after Pliny the Elder. Nice. And I wish I had one for this show.
Pliny the Elder is super, super interesting character from history and very influential on like all kinds of folklore across the world. So yeah, or especially across Europe. But
since where gaming goes to grab a beer, that would have been perfect.
Yeah.
But, I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Yeah. So sometimes the trigger that causes the transformation is the full moon. That's the popular one, obviously. But it can be also other things. There's folklore out there about like putting on a belt of wolf's pelt belt that you strap that on it, and then at night you turn into a werewolf. Potions, there's all kinds of things that can actually cause the transformation. And then the common weaknesses, obviously silver is the popular one, but also wolf's bane, which is an actual real life flower out there. I might be talking out of my butt here, but I want to say it's actually poisonous to wolves. That's why it's called wolf's bane. So of course then they extrapolate, well, wolf's bane must kill a werewolf as well. So, yeah, I'm not thinking of any other weaknesses. Probably, I believe maybe cutting off the head as well is something that people would do or burning at the stake, again, because they're associated with witches. Totally, there's a sad, terrible history of people being accused of being werewolves and killed just because they were outsiders or freaks, or there was a political agenda to try to get them removed from whatever. So that there's a very, very sad history of all that associated with werewolves.
Because that's what humanity wants to do with anybody or anything that's different.
Yep, cool. So yeah, again, as far as appearance, how do you identify a werewolf as opposed to just a regular wolf? Sometimes they are just wolves, bigger wolves, right? Like and again, there was this sort of made up idea that it must have been a human that turned into them. Sometimes they're actually wolves with no tails, so just a regular wolf but no tail, and that's how you identify. That's how it's a werewolf. And then again, sometimes it's a man with a wolf-like appearance, or some hybrid mix of the two. And this is the popular one that we all love. And in most early stories in folklore, it's important that the human has no control over the werewolf when it's trained. I am not in control of this. It is sort of it takes over me. And again, thematically, we'll talk about sort of the thematic impact of werewolves as we get to there. But thematically, of course, that's a huge part of it, right? Is this idea, there's sort of a metaphor of the loss of control, someone giving into their urges, but feeling dissociated from that. Again, that's one of the reasons why this has persisted, right? Is that such a human experience? We've all experienced that. We've all experienced that loss of control where we look back and we go, I can't believe I did that. That was not me. It almost feels like I was taken over by something, some kind of beast or animal urge. That's something we have all, if we've not experienced it directly ourselves, we've been influenced by someone who has been going through it, I think. So, Yep, that's that. So that's werewolves in a very large nutshell. So let's jump right into talking about games then. So, wait, pop culture, before games, real quick, before games, some of the most popular werewolf movies and werewolf stories, obviously The Wolfman, right? The classic horror movie.
Yeah, I imagine like pop culture is where anyone has ever heard of werewolves.
Right,
because
yeah.
none of the things that you just talked about with folklore and mythology affect our lives today.
No,
like, there's
yeah,
a lot
of
of
course.
ties to like European Christianity and a lot of mythology about like diseases and all these things where like it might creep up in your everyday life if you're a churchgoer in that culture in that time in the 1500s.
Right.
But today in 2021, the only reason why anyone listening to this show knows what a werewolf is because of pop culture.
Yes, yep, totally. And all the iconography and imagery and everything comes right from, much of it comes from the Wolfman.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, again, it's Halloween, right? So most people go their whole year without encountering a single werewolf in anything they consume, only to then Halloween comes around, it's like bombarded with werewolves. But yeah, so the Wolfman, of course, with the OG, a very, very popular movie from, I want to say, the 80s or 90s, The Howling. Incredible werewolf movie.
1941, homie.
Mm-hmm. Oh, was it 40?
That's how old it was. 1941. Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were in The Howling. I was like, no way, The Howling is from the 40s.
It was written by Kurt Siodmak and produced and directed by George Wagner.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wagner.
Wagner.
So outside of movies, there's Werewolf the Apocalypse, which is from the World of Darkness tabletop RPG, and it is it shares the same universe as Vampire the Masquerade, and it's a tabletop RPG, so like D&D. So you can actually go check that out. And supposedly I've got a friend who has played it before and loves it. It loves all the World of Darkness stuff. American Werewolf in London, also classic. Teen Wolf, the show with what's his name? Michael J. Fox? Is that I think that's it. That's who it is.
Michael J. Fox is a werewolf?
Yeah, Teen Wolf. And he plays basketball and turns into a werewolf and is like really good at basketball.
I have no idea.
You've never heard of that? Well, they have a CW remake of it where it's like, good looking people and way more dramatic. But the original was like a movie from the 80s where he's a werewolf, but also a teenager. Which is such an 80s premise. I love it. And then, of course, some of the more popular later ones, you got Underworld. Love Underworld.
Yeah, Underworld's great.
Underworld, at least the first like 2 or 3. Van Helsing is one of my personal absolute favorite movies of all time. And by that, like, it's probably my single favorite B movie, where I admit and acknowledge that it's not by any like standard a good movie, but it is such a fun movie for me. I just absolutely adore Van Helsing.
Sweet.
And then, of course,
I've only ever seen it once, but I don't remember.
And then, of course, Twilight kind of doubles as both a vampire and werewolf, as you will frequently see vampires and werewolves kind of, being associated with one another. So, wow, fun stuff. So that's all background on werewolves. So now, finally, we can talk about werewolf games. So what makes a game a werewolf game? And what genres blend well with werewolf games?
I guess a werewolf game is a game that has a werewolf in it.
Yeah, right. Well, again, with all of, and that's the answer with all of these monster smashes, is it either features a werewolf as a playable character, or it is a game where you fight werewolves and kill werewolves and slay them. Mm-hmm. But werewolves featuring prominently in the game, and therefore influencing the gameplay decisions, I think, is a kind of key part of what makes a game a werewolf game. So what are some genres that blend well with werewolf games?
Pretty much all of them, but you had marked third-person action games and shooters and horror games, but there's also some platformers that are out there that involve werewolves, and there's fighting games that involve werewolves.
There's actually an RPG, like a text-based RPG called Werewolf it's actually based on Werewolf the Apocalypse, and it's called like Heart of the Forest, I think. Werewolf.
Yeah.
And that's looked like it was a text-based RPG.
Yep.
There was an old tower defense game on Steam, I think, where you're like defending your town from werewolves and have to like.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, there's all kinds of genres.
It really could be any.
It really could be, but I think you most frequently see it in third-person action games, horror games, and to a lesser extent, you often see werewolves kind of show up as enemies in RPGs.
Yeah.
All kinds of RPGs.
Right. I mean, they're definitely in Final Fantasy for sure.
Yeah. Oh, they're in Final Fantasy. They're in Diablo. They're in. Yep. Yeah. So there's a ton. There's a game called Van Helsing. The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing. I love it. I adore it. And you kill a bunch of werewolves in that. So
is it based on the movie?
It's an indie game. It's not based on the movie. There is actually a Van Helsing game from the movie too, and it was like a third person, like Devil May Cry clone. It was terrible, and you kill werewolves in that too, obviously. But this is its own thing. Yeah, really good though. I actually like it a lot. It's a Diablo clone, but it's a blast. So cool,
sweet.
So knowing then what a werewolf game is, we have probably been avoiding what we think are some of the better werewolf games. So what do you think are the best werewolf games out there? What's the list of must-play werewolf games?
Wow, there's a lot. But also, Not a lot.
No, there's not. It's like one of those things where it's like you'd think there would be more, but there's really not. So, anyways,
and I guess the most popular one that we can talk about, I think that everyone would know about is Skyrim. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's probably the most mass marketed, mass appeal game out there that features werewolves, and your player can contract lycanthropy and be cursed with werewolf transformations.
There's a whole really cool quest. I remember that was the one thing that I truly enjoyed about Skyrim was going through the werewolf quest.
Yeah.
And then becoming a werewolf. Oh yeah, I mean, and it's not like a core gameplay feature. The vast majority of players could probably go through the entire game and never actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that you can, and the fact that they did such a good job of making it a fun gameplay mechanic, definitely puts it on the list. I agree.
Yep. So that's the most, and then I guess like some of the more higher tier werewolf games would be like Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess.
Yeah, which is an interesting pull because it's not, again, it's a Zelda game, but you turn into a wolf. So for all intents and purposes, Link is a werewolf in that game. Like, there's no other way of like really. I mean, yes, you could just say it's a magical transformation. It's not like a curse, but it is a curse, right? It's part of the Twilight realm. So yeah, I don't know. I love it though. I think that it's the Werewolf Zelda game, and it's probably part of the reason why I adore it.
Yeah, and it's kind of a play into the turning into a bunny in the dark world of Link to the Past. But you go into a dark realm and you have to take on a different form because magic, evil magic.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a werewolf.
Yep.
Some of the better but lesser known titles might be Killer Instinct, which is an old WarWare fighter from Super Nintendo days, but also there's a modern version of it on Xbox One.
There's a base character that's in all the games, and it's oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name.
Yep, me too.
But you can play as a werewolf. It's a fighting game, but one of the characters is a werewolf. So again, not really a werewolf game, but features a werewolf in it. So
Baron Conrad von Saberwolf.
Saberwolf, that's what it is. Yeah, Saberwolf. Yep. Oh, I can't believe I forgot that. It's awesome. Yeah. There's also Order 1886.
Yeah.
The Order 1886. Again, you're not playing as a werewolf, but you're killing lots of werewolves, so totally counts.
That's a really underrated game. It's only $10. Well, at the time of this recording, it's $10 on PSN. It's short. It's an easy platinum, and it takes place during it's a twist on the Arthurian legend round table. So the knights are there, but there's guns involved, and it's ridiculously cinematic. The graphics are absolutely incredible and stunning. It just got canned because it was very short and shallow, and it didn't have a lot of depth or promise that it did.
Wasn't it kind of like a tech demo in a lot of ways?
Yeah, it might as well have been. For what. But I jumped into it and loved it. There's stealth action in there. It's third-person shooter like Gears of War, so it's cover shooter.
I totally check it out. Like honestly, I've kind of just sort of like ignored it. Like, you've talked about it on the podcast before, and I've never like jumped into it, but I'm a werewolf fan, so I feel like I owe it to the game,
especially with the low barrier of entry and how cheap it is. It's like you're not forking out $70 or whatever.
I might tack it on to my next year's Halloween plans. This year is booked up, but maybe next year snag a copy and play it for Halloween.
Guess who developed it?
I know it, but I don't know it, so tell me.
It's Ready at Dawn, but also Santa Monica Studio.
Ah, nice. Word.
So you liked God of War, you're going to like this one too. But cool. Anyway, I digress.
Speaking of games that aren't explicitly werewolf games, but feature a lot of werewolves you kill, gotta talk about Bloodborne. It's Halloween.
There you go. Bloodborne. Yep.
Lots of werewolves. I mean, not just the classic looking werewolves, but there's this idea. And again, they're not like one could, if you're a big lore snob, you'll be like, they're not technically werewolves, and you'd be correct about that. But the same thing that causes people to turn into weird, scary man-beast hybrids is the same thing that's like, it's the blood, right? The blood. That's why it's called Bloodborne, is they find this. I won't spoil any spoilers for the story, but they find this blood of these ancient creatures, and they start using it to treat illnesses, only to find out that eventually it turns people into beasts, monsters,
scourge beasts,
and many of those beasts take the form of scary wolf things or hairy wolf men. And you, the player character, all of the potions you drink are blood based, and the same blood, it's blood based, and all of the currency you get are blood echoes. So you too have the same blood running through your veins that makes you strong. So you may not necessarily turn into a wolf, but you are fueled by the same thing that's turning people into wolves. So yes, it's totally a werewolf game through and through. And absolutely, I would say that the nail on the coffin for that one is there is a build you can do that you are just straight up a werewolf. You look like a werewolf, you fight like a werewolf, you roar and howl like a werewolf. You're a werewolf.
Oh, nice.
So, Bloodborne, werewolf game, one of the best all-time games, in my opinion, out there. And probably, for me, top of the list of werewolf games. So I want to blast through some of these because I want to move on from this. Obviously, there's Werewolf the Apocalypse, just came out. Looks fun, but I think when I wrote this, I said jury's out as far as like
how good it is.
My understanding is it's a bad game, but it might actually be a good werewolf game because it really does, like, as far as the werewolf mechanics, like really like the kind of idea of the werewolf influencing gameplay. It's probably the greatest example, right? Because you have like 3 different forms. You have your human form where you're doing a bunch of like shooting bang bang gun stuff. You have a regular wolf form where it's like a stealth mechanic, and then you actually have the werewolf beast form where that's like a rage monster fighting machine thing. So yeah, it's like, again, that's like werewolf game through and through as far as I'm concerned. Wolf Among Us, obviously, Telltale game based on fables. You're playing as the big bad wolf, who in this world is the detective, but, very much werewolf in appearance and everything. Sonic Unleashed, I gotta talk about, right? Like this is like the Sonic version of Twilight Princess, where Sonic becomes a werehog.
Yep.
But definitely a werewolf game. It's influencing gameplay. And then a classic, Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. I don't know if you ever knew about this game, but it was technically a re-release of Castlevania 64, but with like an additional campaign. And in that additional campaign, you play as a character who has a werewolf, and there's a whole werewolf mechanic. You can turn into a werewolf and fight things. I never played it, but I always wanted to. It was one of those games where my parents would never let me rent it because I was a little too young, but I wanted to play it so bad because of the werewolf thing. And never got around to it. So it's one that I totally want to like snag a copy of and play on my 64 or just run an emulator of it. I don't know. But it looks like, I was watching gameplay of it. Looks terrible, but looks kind of fun too at the same time. Terrible but fun. Terrible by, the standards of the time, but also fun as sort of a nostalgic retrospective. So anything else? Any other games you wanted to talk about as far as werewolf games?
Let's see. I don't think there's anything else on this list that I came across.
I mean, there's classics like Altered Beast. Altered Beast is a classic.
I was just about to say that. You beat me right to it.
Sorry.
Yeah, nice.
Obviously, there's a werewolf in Diablo 2. The expansion Diablo 2, the druid can turn into a literal werewolf and werebear. Resident Evil Village has werewolves in it, right? They're even called Lycans. So that's definitely a thing. I think of there was a great indie platformer called Blood of the Werewolf, and that was fun. I played a little bit of that. So we'll move on. Let's move on. Yeah. Next question is, do you think werewolves work well in video games? Do you think they work better as protagonists or antagonists? Have they been given a fair chance in the gaming world, do you think?
They have not been given a fair chance, but they would work wonderfully well in video games, and I don't know why they're not explored more, whether they're protagonists or antagonists. There's a massive amounts of mythologies we just talked about. We scratched the surface, tip of the iceberg of history and mythology surrounding it. And I could imagine in my head like an epic tale as big as Horizon Zero Dawn or God of War, centered around some sort of the mythology around werewolves, and like the main character might be a werewolf. And I know The Witcher really does a good job with some of the kind of werebeasts coming out at night. There's a whole side quest that has to do with like werewolves, and so that's wonderful. Things need to do that more, but I think there could be a big title that could do it. And you also have the very asynchronous multiplayer aspect of like a team of people versus a werewolf, or like we have Friday the 13th, we have Predator, Hunting Grounds, and like various other multiplayer experiences now that they could totally be reworked for a werewolf, and one player is a werewolf about, like, versus other people.
Yeah, think about like the game Among Us and the whole idea of the hidden. Again, part of what makes werewolf mythology compelling is like anybody could be a werewolf, right? In fact, there's a social deduction game out there, or a card game called, there was originally it's based off of a game called Ultimate Werewolf, and then they did Ultimate Werewolf One Night, which is a more condensed version of it. But yeah, in both cases, it's the idea of like someone's a werewolf and you have to figure out who. I feel like that would work really great for a game like that, or even like again, like a game like Friday the 13th, like you said, where you're or Evolve, where one person's a werewolf and 4 people have to fight them. I totally agree. That would be great. No, and also I agree with the general ideas. Like, at least werewolves as protagonists have been done dirty, right? Like, that's why I was so excited about Apocalypse when it was first announced. Is I was like, sweet, finally, right? And I was so disappointed that it did poorly, and I ended up not buying it as a result of its reviews. But like, I totally agree. Like, I mean, not just from not just from a thematic point of view, right? Like, you're right. You could tell some really cool stories. There's a reason why the story sticks with us. Again, the person trying to control the beast within, unable to control it, losing control, but like gaining control over time. Like that is a compelling story, I think. Hunted because they are different, right? Like all of that. There's so many different directions you could go with it. And yet it's been largely ignored, I think. Maybe because people are worried about, because it's so much in other pop culture, people are worried about coming across as cliche, but I feel like it's been done dirty. But then not just from a story point of view, but from a mechanic point of view, everything about werewolves screams video games, right? Like building up a rage bar and turning into the beast, for like a brief amount of time. Imagine a game where you like the werewolf mechanic was a core gameplay element where like in order to do well with the game, you had to unleash the beast, right? But when you start, imagine like that when you start playing, you have no control. Literally, when the beast mode triggers, you just go off and start flailing randomly. You have to put down the controller because it starts going off and doing. Or you could put down the controller; it goes off and does its own thing. But the way you progress in the game, like a progression element, could be like leveling up your control, where like, okay, you've reached control level 1, so to speak. You now have 30 seconds of control before you go off, right? And then that goes from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, to 2 minutes to 30 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes, 2 minutes to 5 minutes, whatever it is. However it's balanced doesn't really matter. The numbers don't matter, but like that idea of progressing over, like getting control over time, screams werewolf.
And you could even do like a weird Metroidvania, maybe a reverse Metroidvania, where you, instead of acquiring new weapons to allow you to explore new areas, you're actually removing your inability to control werewolf to allow you to control the thing to explore new areas.
Yeah, now I can trigger beast mode and then jump across this ledge because I have control, and then I'm going to lose control in a second. You could pop in the weaknesses, right? You could inject silver or wolf's bane to remove, there could be consumables to like get me out of beast mode now. I don't want to be out of control of my character, so get me out of beast mode. You lose the buffs and everything, but it screams it. But there's been some good attempts. But I always feel like the best werewolf games are not werewolf games. They just have werewolves in them that you can like werewolf, like Skyrim, like not Breath of the Wild, like Twilight Princess, like Bloodborne. They're not necessarily werewolf games in regards to that's not the primary character's defining feature. It's a build you can do, or it's like a partial gameplay mechanic. But at the end of the day, Twilight Princess is a Zelda game. Link is still Link. Most of the game and most of the compelling parts of the game you play as Link, and the werewolf thing is kind of on the side. So
exactly, it's not front and center and prominent. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So, anyways, as antagonists, they were great, of course. Though as enemies, they're intimidating, they're scary. One of the things I feel like pop culture has really contributed to the werewolf like concept is I feel like werewolves charge. Like, I feel like their primary, like, charging, like, is their primary means of attack, is they just, like, run at you really fast and jump and then try to tackle you and rip you to shreds or whatever. Like, that, I feel like, is the werewolf thing, at least in, like, modern pop culture. And that works great in video games. Holy crap, that works so well. They're faster than you. They're bigger than you. They've got teeth and claws. The only thing that they don't have is intelligence. So you outsmart them is how you beat them. In almost every game, I think that where they show up as antagonists, that's like their thing. That's how they work. So as antagonists, as enemies, they're awesome. So, all right. Any other thoughts with how they work in video games?
I mean, no, but there's so many. We could talk at length for hours about how werewolves change mechanics, how that builds into gameplay themes, and how you can. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Even something like Resident Evil, but with werewolves instead of zombies. Like would work in a horror game that's like exploration and you're trapped and
you're describing Village.
Is Village really werewolves?
I mean at the beginning of the game, the zombie replacements are werewolves, and they are adequately terrifying. Because why
didn't you mention that earlier?
I did bring it up as I said that they're even called Lycans in the game.
Okay.
But it was great. What works about them as zombie replacements is, again, you get used to a specific like thing in Resident Evil, right? Like the zombies, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna have to fight. For the most part, I'm gonna have to fight zombies at the beginning of a Resident Evil game, and most of the time in those games, the zombies are fairly predictable in the way they move. These Lycans, man, they will dodge your bullets. They will circle you. It's great. You're right. Yeah, they work so well.
We need more of that in our lives. And maybe the Hogwarts game, Legacy of Hogwarts.
Oh, yeah.
For Harry Potter. Yeah, would actually feature I know Lupin was a werewolf, but maybe there's more of them, and like that can be fun.
Well, there's definitely more werewolves in the Harry Potter universe. So.
Yeah, so yeah, that could be fun too.
All right, what are pitfalls? Where can werewolf design devolve into not good game design, or where in what ways do werewolf games kind of tend? And we discussed how they've been done dirty. They can be better, and we discussed all the ways they can be better. Why do they keep falling short? What are the pitfalls? Why do werewolf games sometimes kind of suck?
They're shoe-ins and copy paste. You know, we need an antagonist that can run fast. That's kind of scary. That does melee damage.
Yeah.
Here's a werewolf.
Werewolf,
okay, I done. It's just like this easy kind of cop out. Let's not really think about it. Let's just throw it in there and see what happens. And for some reason, they're not explored in story and in lore. Maybe because it's kind of simple. I don't know.
I guess maybe it's like that idea of like people are just so familiar with it. It's overly familiar in the same way that kind of vampires are. But again, like my counter argument to that is, but why are there so many great vampire games out there? Why are there so many great games where you can play as a vampire, but not as many where you can play as a werewolf? Why are vampires more compelling as protagonists, seemingly, than werewolves are? And maybe it is that lack of control, the loss of control. I don't know, but yeah, it doesn't seem to work. Maybe it's also the idea of like it's hard to make them feel different without making them feel like a gimmick, if that makes sense, right? Like the idea of like, oh, you like in Legacy of Darkness, the Castlevania game, like the character moveset doesn't like change. It just he now looks like a wolf, and I think his attacks have like longer reach or something like that. But like other than that, the moveset's the exact same. So like there's like those are the two extremes. Like you want turning into a wolf to mean something, but like you don't. But you also don't want it to be overly gimmicky, where it's like, oh, you're just a wolf for a little bit. I actually love how Bloodborne handles it. In there's a specific build, you have to get a specific weapon and some other things around your character, but you can make it work. The build is like you can basically trigger the werewolf mode, and you build a mechanic that's already built in the game called Beasthood. And every time you hit something while your Beasthood meter is active, you gain more Beasthood, which increases your damage, but it also increases the damage you take. So it's a glass cannon build. So the more you hit, the more werewolf hits you get in there, you're going to do a ton of damage, but you get hit once by the boss or once by the enemy, and you could be toast in a second, right? So again, there's sort of the game, the werewolf mechanic is built in such a way where it encourages you to sometimes consider not being in the werewolf mode. So meaningful choices are great, but again, alternatively, it's just another form of rage meter, right? Like I always think of Kratos's rage mode or whatever, where it's like, okay, cool, you built your rage meter up, you turn into a werewolf for 30 seconds and kill things. Like, okay, whatever. So I don't know. That's I think maybe that's why. Maybe that's part of it, is it's hard to design it without coming across as both gimmicky and cliche, and you don't want to be both of those things.
No, you don't.
Okay,
yeah.
So
it would require a bigger barrier of entry for innovation and creativity that I guess no one has really approached yet in a new and innovative way.
So disappointing, because I really would love for like a game like there's. It's just begging for. I feel like the only game developers that are exploring that space, quote, properly exploring that space, are just bad game developers. Where I would love something like Santa Monica or Naughty Dog to do a werewolf game and do it right. Like, oh, can you imagine? But maybe
Uncharted has done wonderfully in like taking a little bit of supernatural elements and kind of painting their main motivations for their antagonists around it, sort of, or like affecting them in some way that's kind of creative and fun and not overly bearing and campy. So let's do that. Go Naughty Dog.
I know, right? And I would love there's so many developers I would love to make make a good werewolf game. But maybe that's it. Again, maybe the good developers feel like they need to be doing something different and out of the box, and werewolves just don't check that box, right? They don't check that idea of like, again, werewolf stories are overdone already. But I don't understand why vampires seem to get a different treatment. But whatever, it is what it is. So cool. All right. Well, then again, we talked about what werewolf games do well. We talked about pitfalls. We've hinted at this last question, but let's go ahead and fully address it. What do you want to see from werewolf games in the future? Where would you like to see them go?
We've almost answered that already.
I think so, but summation.
Just more innovation, coming up with a really cool way to tell a unique story. And there's so many cultural issues right now going on in our world. In case you haven't noticed, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Okay, a pandemic could very well be your werewolf analogy for like getting the disease, how people are treated, the dichotomy of our society, the breakdown of our bipartisan like government. I mean, you could take any of those giant themes and just like apply that as a giant metaphor to werewolves and how they're treated, even going back to like the Salem witch trials and like the witch hunts of the early settlers here in North America. And you could do something crazy, very scary. I mean, like The Last of Us Part 2 comes to mind when you have to go through the wooded area with the group of people.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And like something like that, like it's there. We've hit this stuff before. We just haven't gone all in yet. And I think there's something
even
there.
Bloodborne that was close. Like even Bloodborne where it was like again, you're fighting werewolves on the reg, and it takes place in like a city that is clearly inspired by like 18th century London. So it's, again, on the surface, it's a werewolf game, but it goes from Bram Stoker to H.P. Lovecraft real fast. And that's great. It works. It's so good. But by the end of the game, you're fighting cosmic horrors from, beyond the realm, and you're not fighting werewolves quite as much. Yep. The werewolf thing ends up taking a back seat. So most people, when they think of Bloodborne, think, oh, it's the best H.P. Lovecraft-inspired game. And they're not wrong. So, yeah, it's definitely, let's go all in on the werewolf thing. And I totally agree with your points about the things it could say about society. But, in my mind, when I think werewolves, kind of as a counterpoint, I think it's a very personal story. Because, again, it's such a human thing. So one of the reasons why we always, you may be wondering, if you're a longtime listener, you may be wondering, why do they always talk about, like, what do they want to see from this space in the future? It's because we're hoping someday some game developers listen to this show and listen to our ideas and get inspired. Because, like, we think these could be really great games. And so I will say, any game developer or future game developer listening to this, here's a freebie that I think could be really good, is a good werewolf game centered around the themes of like personal control, right? Like personal self-control, discipline, and dealing, the great metaphor of trying to deal with the quote beast within, trying to deal with urges beyond that seem like they're beyond your ability to master. It's dripping with possibility there of great solid storytelling, but not just that. Again, video games are meant to be played, right? So you can tell a great story all you want, but if that story doesn't influence the gameplay, but there's so many great gameplay opportunities. So this really is truly a freebie, a space that has not been properly explored and could be leaned into really well.
And if you're seeking actual video game, what do you call, like an idea or something, experience, an example, if you will,
inspiration.
Inspiration, thank you. If you're seeking actual video game inspiration for what we're talking about, go play The Witcher 3, and there's a side quest called Wild at Heart. And it starts with, my wife Hannah's missing. A few days ago, she went into the woods and hasn't yet returned. I'm near out of my wits with worry and will pay any price to a man who brings her back to me, or at least tells me where to look for her. And that's the kickoff to the quest. You have no idea what's going on. You go into the woods, come to find out it's a werewolf. There's loss. I won't spoil the story, but things go crazy.
There's so lots of twists.
It's nothing like what you would expect at all, but it's only a side quest. And the whole thing lasts maybe an hour or two in one night. But that is just the tip of what I'm looking for in a good werewolf game that deals with that stuff on a bigger scale. That's a full-blown, like 10 to 15-hour campaign. Yes. That would be awesome.
I just want to play as a werewolf, and I want it to be fun, and I also want it to be a good game. So yes, make it happen, video game designers. It's rife with possibility. And you launch that thing in already the preferred release window, but you drop that thing in October, and if it reviews well, it's going to sell like hotcakes. People are like, Halloween, werewolves. Yep. Yeah, there's so much possibility with marketing and stuff. And again, if the game is good enough too, and you release it the right time of year, then it's a game people are going to want to come back to every Halloween as their Halloween game. That's right. There's so much possibility there. So I want my werewolf game, yo.
Yep.
Well, cool. I think that's probably a fair stopping place there then. So we want to hear from listeners too. What do you think about werewolves in games? Is it too dangerous for good developers to invest in because it's too cliche and overdone, a space that's been just a horse that's been beaten to death in pop culture? Or do you agree that it's rife with possibility? And what do you want to see from werewolf games? What would be your kind of dream werewolf game? We want to hear those thoughts and more. You can get back to us. Once again, Termite will share where you can interact with us if you have those thoughts.
Not only do I want to know your thoughts about werewolves in video games, I want to know what you're playing this Halloween weekend coming up. This weekend will be Halloween on a Sunday, so if you're into experiencing the holiday by way of video games, there's lots of stuff out there. What are you playing? What are you sitting with? I'm hopefully playing Resident Evil 7 by the time you're listening to this, and alive, and because I will lose sleep when I play that game, and I will not sleep, so I might die. And so you can let us know what games you are playing.
And as a side note and a little bit of self-plug, if you don't know what you want to play and have a PlayStation and have PS Plus, you have access to... If you have, I guess if it's a PS5, you have access to Bloodborne. If you are a longtime PS4 Plus subscriber, you might all have Bloodborne from one of their monthly giveaways as well. And if you haven't been listening to the podcast for a few weeks, I'm doing a, quote, Return to Yharnam event, and it's the whole month of October. So I have, up to this point, by the time this episode airs, definitely finished my personal playthrough of it, but would love to co-op. I would love to help new players trying it out for the first time, or old returning players who loved the game and want to have a great Halloween experience. The game is just dripping with Halloween, and again, Stoker and Lovecraft, great classic horror writers, were like the primary influences. And yeah, totally great Halloween game. And again, one of the biggest barriers of entry is the difficulty, but the quote easy mode of the game is co-op. And I will blast any boss into oblivion to help you out. So hop in, hit us up on Discord, where Termite will show you how to get there, and join the Yharnam 2021 channel and play Bloodborne with me.
A very long way to say, go to 80bitpodsmash.com. It's our landing website, 80bitpodsmash.com. There are links to all of our social media outlets with which you can connect to us on those topics we just discussed. Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter, as well as our Discord server and all of our show notes. They're all there. Go check us out. And if you want more podcast content, be sure to check out our RSS feed and other podcast platforms of your choice to make it more convenient for you to get the show wherever you are.
Sweet. All right. So next week, again, as Termite indicated, we have a nice slate of episodes already planned. So next week, we're going to be talking about Marvel. And specifically, we talked about superheroes before, but we haven't specifically focused in on Marvel and video games and their very, very interesting, complicated hit-or-miss relationship with video games. Yeah. So we'll be talking about
long history.
Very interesting history, though, too. So we're going to be talking about all of that, and you have to look forward to that on November 1st next week.
We will see you next week.